humans, how's it going? Susan Ruth here. Thanks for listening to another episode of Hey Human Podcast. This is episode 251, and I had a conversation with Vanessa Lech. She is the founder of Carolina Addiction and Anger Management. She's a clinical social worker and a clinical addiction specialist. So we have a conversation about her work and about anger, about passive aggressiveness, and a few things in between. I found it quite interesting. I've done a lot of reading about anger and whether or not it's addictive and how it spreads and her philosophy, she doesn't believe that it's addictive. So it was really interesting to hear that take on it and to hear her thoughts on it. I put on the links page a ton of articles about all different things around anger and the idea of anger and where it comes from and how to control it and whether or not it is addictive, meaning not addictive like the way cocaine is addictive, but that it sort of, for some people, it triggers a response in the brain it becomes so powerful that people start to crave that feeling. There's an interesting Psychology Today article about it that I put on the links page. Anyway, I mean, there's so many philosophies about therapy and neuroscience, and we're only just scratching the surface, to be honest. I don't have any new shows to report watching. I'm back on my habit of watching house reruns, which I love because I like to look up the medical things that have been diagnosed and read about them. I don't know, there's something about reading that stuff that makes me feel more in tune with the world. It's very weird. I don't know. It's a strange quirk habit I have. It's kind of like how I feel listening to murder podcasts and watching true crime. SNL just did a sketch about that this weekend, about women's obsession. And I have a theory. The reason why women, maybe more so than men statistically, are really into murder shows, true crime and murder podcasts, is it gives us a sense of safety. We learn stuff, firstly, about how bad guys do what they do and can protect ourselves that much more. And it gets us in the minds of people so we can pay attention to more red flags. At least that's my theory. Totally arbitrary theory, but I have a feeling it has something to do with feeling like the more of those kinds of shows we listen to and watch, the less likely it might happen to us. Who knows? I could be wrong, but I do love those kinds of shows. In other news, Hey Human Podcast can be found on the social media under Instagram and Facebook. My personal social media, Susan Ruthism, can be found Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. You can email me, susan@heyhumanpodcast.com. You can go to my other website, Susan Ruth, and find out more about me and my art and music and things and sign up for the mailing list. You can go to heyhumanpodcast.com to learn everything there is to know about this show in particular. The links page, as I mentioned, is full up of articles and books and ideas and things from every guest I have been on the show. And also on the Hey Human Podcast website, you will find the store where you can get Hey Human merch and information about every guest that has ever been on the show. A lot of really cool conversations coming up. I was in a frenzy of having conversations, and it's been delightful. And so there is a huge pile of people coming. I mean, that would be true no matter what, but there's so many really fascinating conversations to share with you, including Anna from Recompose. They take you and turn you into a forest after you die, which is pretty cool and interesting. There's Roberta. She is a anesthesiologist and is really interested in how the mind heals, and so she's doing work in that arena now. There is Barbara, who lost her nose to melanoma and has a prosthetic, and she told her story. There is writers and playwrights and scientists, so many different interesting people coming. Cameron Esposito, the comedian, is going to be on the show. I'm interviewing her actually Friday for an upcoming episode. So there's just so much going on. It's really exciting. And I have news. I sold my first screenplay, so that's exciting. It was optioned this past week, and I don't have details to give yet. I'm very excited about that. Okay, I think that's about it. We can get into the show. Thank you for listening and for spreading the word, telling your friends and family and everyone about the show. Please rate and review Hey Human on iTunes or wherever you listen to your podcasts. I know it takes a bit of time, 5 minutes or whatever, but it's super helpful. It helps push it up in the algorithm of iTunes especially. And if you love the show, if you're finding yourself listening to a lot of episodes and things, please, please, please take the time to write a review. It really helps, and I very much appreciate it. Okay, let's get into this. Stay safe, be well, be kind. Here we go. Vanessa Lech, welcome to Hey Human Podcast.
Thank you for having me on. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. You piqued my interest on LinkedIn. I saw you on LinkedIn, and you had posted about an upcoming workshop about anger management. I thought, well, that's interesting. So I dug around and checked you out, and I thought, oh, wow, she's got a lot of things that you do that I'm interested in. So before we get into the deep dive of that, let's start out with just you as a person. Where are you from, and what did you study in school, and what put you on the path of what you do now?
So I have a lot of life experience, even though I'm not 100 years old yet. I feel like I am. And so I grew up in Florida, and I love that state. It's a great state. Then I joined the military when I was 22, and I joined the Army. And then I ended up, and I'd gone to college for a couple of years prior to that, doing all the horrible general education courses. And this was like pre-internet being as huge as it is now. I mean, it existed, but not like it does now. And the whole online course thing was like, very taboo. No one thought that was like a legitimate thing, and so everyone had to be in person. And so there's so much flexibility now with attending school. I'm so jealous of that because all my degrees were done when that wasn't the case. And so I joined the Army, ended up in Washington State, and I was there for the better part of about 4 years. And that's where I got married to my spouse, who's also on active duty still in the military, in the Army. And then that kind of took me to a place where I was basically very transient and kind of displaced after joining active duty. And I feel like that's the case for most people, because you can end up basically being in a community that just is not a good fit for you at all, culturally, or in a career, and the spouse as well, or whoever the family is with that person potentially. And it's just very disruptive to people's lives. It really is. It has quite a long-term effect potentially. Anyways, and so ended up in North Carolina, and I lived and worked there off and on for a number of years. And that's where like my licenses and stuff currently are. And I work remotely like everyone else now, except I was doing it before it was cool, before COVID-19. So I was like ahead of the track. I had the training. Pretty proud of that, actually. And it's just coincidental how everything worked out. It's just really weird. And then I traveled outside the state and am right now actually visiting my spouse, different state. And COVID's just kind of upended everything. It's very different. Plans that we had have changed, and the world's just really different. And as far as how I got into this work, all of my degrees have something to do with healthcare or behavioral healthcare in some way, shape, or form, basically. Looking back, I really wish I would have studied the law, and I actually plan to go back to school and get some formalized education in the law in one way or another, because it's just so important to everyone's life, whether they realize it or not. Whether you're a construction worker, healthcare worker, chef, like it intersects with their entire life. And I didn't realize that until in more recent years. But I ended up doing a lot of different type of mental health work, to include working at a crisis mental health center. And it had high turnover, like most of the places I've worked. And there was some people doing work in substance abuse and anger management specifically, and specifically court ordered. And they quit, and there was no one to cover for them at all. And no one wanted to do that work. They wanted to work with women and the kids. And so there I was. I just like literally fell right on into it. And I found that I really liked the work. And I was, dealing with judges quite a lot through the years with all this. And And that was a positive experience, that specifically. And I was in court every week because of the court ordered work I was doing. And, it just felt like a pretty natural fit basically for me. And I just really enjoyed a lot of different things about it. And then I ended up opening up my own company after that, and basically called it Caroline Addiction Anger Management, just because I was like, well, what do I call the work I do? And it's like, it just was really natural. And it never occurred to me that, a pandemic would occur and the world would go spinning and then people would have a specific interest in this somehow. And that's exactly what's happened.
When you were a child growing up, was there people around you that were that had substance abuse or anger management issues? Do you think did you have a really super happy kidhood? And
yeah, so as far as my childhood's concerned and people around me, I had a relative that was a nurse for their entire working career, and so I thought I was gonna be a nurse for a lot of years, and that didn't happen, and I think that was for the best. As far as substance abuse, it's really everywhere. I mean, there is no place, rich or poor, or highly educated or uneducated, where substance abuse doesn't exist in some way, shape, or form, in my experience. And so, yeah, that was around and stuff like that. Maybe it influenced a little bit, but I kind of just feel like it was more just circumstances. You know what I mean? It's just like what I described. It just happened, I just happened to have that interest in it.
What made you decide to go into the Army?
So I had multiple relatives through the years that had been in the military. My own mother had been in the military, which is exceedingly rare, I now realize. And at the time, for me, it was pretty normal and natural. I didn't realize how rare it was to have as many relatives in the military, specifically even a mother that had been in the military, until after I was well into my adult years. And then I kind of observed the rest of the world and realized, oh, this isn't like the norm, And so to me, it was just an option, just like any other career path, just like any other job. It was just an option. And it was just an option that I happened to consider. And that was it.
Yeah. What is your official title now as in your work?
So I have multiple credentials, but basically I call myself an owner clinician, basically, because I feel like that's pretty fitting. That's why I've put on paperwork a lot. But basically, I have a license as a clinical social worker, LCSW, in the state of North Carolina currently. I have a license as a clinical addiction specialist associate in the state of North Carolina currently. The second one I just mentioned is an optional license, which basically I don't have to have, but I ended up picking up when I was doing all that substance abuse work I mentioned. And I did it because I was working with a lot of higher intensity situations, which most people don't work with, I now realize. And at one point I was doing 100% substance abuse specific work with very high intensity type situations. And so, it gave me an opportunity to do some extra training, get some extra clinical consultation type thing, and to learn more. And so that's what I did. Don't know if I'll always keep it because, all this stuff it's very expensive. It's very time consuming. It took me years and years to get my first license. I just mentioned, I had a lawyer that's in my office building asking me about this, and was under the impression that you could get like one of these licenses really easily, and like not the ones I have. So
what does high intensity mean? What do you mean by that? Explain high intensity situation in regards to what you're doing.
Right. So I don't take on those types of cases anymore because that I just wouldn't be appropriate for what I'm doing right now. But back when I worked in a mental health crisis center, you had people that were in and out of the hospital a lot, psychiatric ward, harm to self or others, would be the criteria for that type of thing. And they'd be screened by multiple healthcare professionals, myself included, if they're, someone I was working with at the time, in order to be admitted. And those are like involuntary commitments type thing. And, then I worked at a place and, working with people that, basically working with people, different situations where I was working with people that were going in and out of detox, because there's different levels of care. So like someone that goes into detox, that's basically they're literally detoxing. They're like getting all the stuff out of their system in a safe, medically controlled environment. There's a place that I routinely referred people to for that. They're pretty amazing to coordinate care with. And, then from there, you could go into like an inpatient treatment program for substance abuse, where you may be for varying lengths of time. It widely varies depending on, what your location is and what's offered there. And in finances as well is a variable, just depending. Some things are state funded, a lot of things aren't. And there's a lot of variables there. So basically higher intensity would be people that are needing to be or going to be a high likelihood of going into an inpatient setting of some kind. And I worked with a lot of countless people like that, you know what I mean, that were in and out of inpatient settings, or maybe needed to be but refused to go, which in some cases you can refuse to go, and that's a whole nother conversation.
That's where the court ordered, I suppose, comes in.
Well, no, the court ordered typically, in my experience, and it varies by state, and I've just been practicing in one state primarily, but basically that would be like someone that may have a domestic violence type situation, and which is more broad than what most people think. It could be a fight with a family member. It could be, it could be many things. It's not necessarily what a lot of people think. And then they end up in the court system, and then the courts basically in some situations I've seen commonly will be like, okay, we'll drop the charges and dismiss it if you do your court-ordered anger management and whatever else they want them to do potentially, and fulfill those requirements. And so it's actually a really good deal potentially, because, the state where I'm visiting right now that I don't practice in, I was talking to a criminal defense lawyer that's in my building, and they were saying that like they don't do that at all here. Nothing gets dismissed, everything sticks. And it's like, whoa, that's pretty intense, because now people have criminal backgrounds that otherwise wouldn't have them, or are going to jail when they otherwise could have avoided a 6-month or however long stint in jail.
I'm curious, the thing that really interests me about all of this is the idea of anger in and of itself. What do you think of anger personally? Like, how do you wrap your head around it? I'm sure all different kinds of anger exist, but if you were to, let's say, personify anger, how would you do it?
So the one thing I like to say about anger is it's a normal human emotion, and most people get that mixed up with thinking, when a lot of people, and I hear this a lot lately right now, especially since I did that anger management presentation, which is like just weird how all of that worked out. Anyways, most people, when they think anger, they immediately, especially these days, they immediately jump to someone that's homicidal and wants to kill people or kill a person, or someone that's like, quote, crazy. Hear that a lot, or want to throw labels at people of these heavy mental health diagnoses. One thing of anger and emotion does not necessarily have anything to do with the other. I mean, we're talking about totally polar opposite things here. Anger is a normal human emotion, just like happiness, just like joy, just like sadness, just like all the other fleeting emotions that we have. And most people are going to feel angry at some point in their lifetime. It doesn't mean that they're broken or they're damaged or they have a mental health diagnosis necessarily, or that they're going to go, bonkers and, kill someone, and that's unfortunately these days, especially, people are really jumping to that. I'm like, wow.
Well, also, I think these days people are very hot to jump. I mean, you know what I mean? Right now, it seems like
anxious,
so high intensity that it's just one little thing and it teeters them over the edge and suddenly they're exploding. You see it on social media a lot,
Well, the media, though, social media, broadcast media, the big news channels, are their bread and butter basically is to sensationalize things, to show the most extreme of everything. And that's not the norm for every single person out there, for the general population at all. And so, but yeah, anger is just a normal human emotion. And the overwhelming majority of people, that I work with these days and I agree to work with are just people, everyday people, people that have work-life stress issues, what I most commonly see are relationship issues, work-life balance issues, just the everyday struggles that all of us are likely to have at some point, or most of us, you know what I mean? It's nothing like super extreme at all. I'm not agreeable to working with people that are in that super extreme realm, because if you're in that super extreme realm, higher intensity, like we're talking about, I mean, you need to be seen, by a more intensive setting. I'm working online with people. You need people seen. For example, like the crisis clinic I used to work at, we had a prescriber on, multiple settings I worked at. We had prescriber or prescribers on staff on demand, basically. And we had a team of clinicians, working together and stuff. And we had a hospital right down the road, literally right down the road. So very different of what that could handle, you know what I mean? And that's the kind of setting where, some people need to be, but that's not the overwhelming majority of people. That's like a really small segment. And I swear, working in those kinds of settings for a period of time, it kind of warps your mind about, like when you see so much of that, it becomes your normal, even though that's not the norm.
When it comes to addiction, people that you work with, do you find that addiction is really, that is the Band-Aid?
Every situation's unique, and no, not necessarily. Not necessarily. In the presentation I just did recently, I did do a slide where I think I called it substance use disorders and related matters. I had like a slide about that because it basically, the presentation you're referring to was kind of like a general overview of topical of, anger and potential causes or underlying causes. And so when you refer to substance use and substance use disorders, there's so many variables, but let's just say generally speaking, there can be a situation where someone's taking a substance or substances, okay, and that's altering their behavior. And one of the, behavior outcomes is that they're more irritable and their mood's changing and now they're feeling more angry. And, I kind of in a situation where I'm seeing that. And when, they're coming with me saying, oh, I'm angry, I'm irritable. And then you find out, oh, there's an underlying substance use disorder and related matter, that type of thing. And so that can happen. And then, you can have situations, where people are in denial, like they don't want to deal with the underlying cause. They want to kind of pretend like that doesn't exist and it's this other thing over here, when it's like, well, if you treat the substance use disorder, then you won't have these other problems. You know what I mean? And when it comes to like diagnosing people, for example, with the DSM-5, Diagnostic Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, 5th edition, even it says all throughout that book, make sure that, I'm paraphrasing, or basically make sure that you are ruling out all these other factors before you start diagnosing them with XYZ, whatever that may be, whether you're talking about substance use disorder or just a mental health diagnosis of some kind, because it can potentially be misleading. If someone's describing some very generic symptoms, we could immediately jump to, oh, it's this mental health disorder, when the reality is it's this other issue that they're having in their relationship that's causing them to feel this way, think this way, act this way. And once you address that, the problem's resolved. So, there's just a lot of different variables, but no, just because someone's angry or something doesn't mean that they're going to have a substance use disorder, or just because they have a substance use disorder doesn't mean that they're going to be angry, because different substances affect different people in different ways. Some people may be super mellow and really unmotivated. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, me quite the opposite.
Do you find on average when you are involved that people are willing to acknowledge that they have anger issues, or do you think it takes a bit to get them to see that? Are people pretty self-aware in your work?
Every situation's unique, so I can't really put like a whole generality on a whole, the general population. People typically come to me when they're in a crisis situation of some kind. When I say crisis situation, I don't mean the most extreme thing that may come to people's minds, okay? I just mean what's a crisis for them, a pivotal moment for them in a relationship, in a work situation, in a personal situation, whatever the case may be, where they then reach out for help or feel like they need to get help. In some cases, that's because they're court ordered, right? That's going to be their crisis moment. Like, oh my God, I'm going to get this done because I've got this paper and I'm going to, whatever the consequences potentially. And so there's a motivation there. Now, whether or not the motivation is sustained and progress or change is made, that's totally subjective. Everybody's really different.
Yeah.
It's very highly individualized. Some people are going to be really self-aware or come to terms with things really fast, and other people just won't. They'll just be like, screw you. I'm out of here.
So obviously you can't, I understand that absolutely you can't talk about specific cases, but could you explain to the listeners how you go about approaching someone that does have anger issues? Like if I came to you and I said, oh my gosh, I have this thing and it seems to be getting the best of me. I fly off the handle. I don't know why. I can't control it. How would you approach a situation like that?
Well, a couple of different ways. I mean, for starters, if you or a person like you described came to me with something like that, I mean, that is very vague. And so I would immediately need to dig deeper. I'd be asking probably 50 questions, so to speak, to dig deeper to kind of see what's going on, just at even a surface level of what is going on. Why are they calling me? Why? Like, what's the motivation here? And so that may happen in a initial phone call, or that could end up being an initial assessment potentially if it's moved along that quickly and they've just booked an appointment. I haven't had a chance to talk with them. And then I would dig deep. I have pre-screenings for people prior to them going into the initial clinical assessment that I require them to fill out in advance. And that gives me a heads up on some different things to include, whether or not I should even be moving forward with them at all, or referring them out type thing, potentially. And so all my pre-assessment has it's just comprehensive. It's so many different questions, it's all digital. And so that helps me screen right away, pre-screen. And then, if I'm talking to them on the phone or I'm doing the really in-depth initial clinical assessment, I get to the bottom of what that unique situation is, because it's going to be unique for each person. And then from there, a treatment plan, basically, or an action plan, as some may call it, is developed and move forward in learning what the situation is, learning what's really going on, because it's like an onion, you're kind of just peeling back those layers, peeling them back. Like, you're not going to learn. I can learn enough typically to know within the first 5 minutes whether or not I should even be moving forward with this person at all. But then from there, it's going to take a number of sessions typically to try to peel back the onion, to try to get to the bottom of what's going on, or potentially longer, and then, trying to make some progress along the way with some basic things. Some of those may be relaxation exercises for the person, in that unique situation. Some of it may be psychoeducational material, which is basically educating the person about their situation, if they have an anger issue, or if they have mental health diagnosis of some kind, or if I suspect something else is going on, providing that. And, then there's like therapeutic approach, essentially, of basically helping people achieve their goals and function at a higher level in their life.
What are some of the questions on that assessment?
Oh God, it's so long. So many things. A lot of it's like psychosocial stuff as well as substance use stuff. Those are just a couple of things come off top of my head as I'm thinking about it. So, are you married, or are you in a relationship? Do you have kids? What's your family situation? As far as mom, dad, some pretty basic questions about that. Do you use any substances? I really spelled that one out, boy, especially because my work is substance abuse. I mean, I literally, I just kind of laugh because I remember when designing the forms, I was still working with 100% substance use. People with that problem, that was their main problem. And so like, I literally had, and I'm not going to say I have every drug known to mankind, because that someone might abuse, but pretty comprehensive list there, a checklist, like, do you do any of these things? And then there's a box like, and do you do anything that I didn't mention? And if so, if you do any of these things, how much, frequency, how long, all these different things, which will help me right away. And that helps kind of, the pre-assessment questionnaire, which most, healthcare providers do have something like that in some way, shape, or form. Just helps save a ton of time for both parties. You know what I mean? So You're not having to spend 2 hours trying to ask these questions.
Sure.
Instead, you're just working off of a good starting point.
Do you think anger is addictive, and do you think anger is viral?
No and no. I don't. And I just say that from my own just clinical perspective. Those aren't words that I've never heard anyone ever even refer to, being, addicted to anger, or anger being viral.
It's like people saying addicted to drama, or, that they're so used to living in this angry space that it feels more normal to them than not. And then viral meaning like they get caught up in other people's anger, and then it elicits anger in themselves. That's what I mean by those two.
So, coping mechanisms are what come to my mind when you say that. That maybe somebody like what you're describing could be using anger as a coping mechanism, or a drama like reality TV, right, as a coping mechanism to get their mind off of whatever, something else. So that could become a maladaptive and unhealthy bad, like I'm trying to simplify, an unhealthy, bad behavioral pattern that has been established for a person potentially as a coping mechanism, which is basically a way that they have adapted to their unique life circumstance and to get through it, essentially. Okay. That's kind of what when you describe that, kind of what I think of essentially. As far as anger being viral, no. However, I would say with the description that you provided, certainly if you're around, this would be a great example, actually. So the news media, if you are 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, on that news media cycle, or every time you're awake, basically turning on the big new national news network and all the toxicity that's pumping out constantly about all the bad things that are happening in the world, or that and a lot of times they're being sensationalized, constantly, then it is likely that you're not going to be in the most positive spirits. Versus if you're able to tune that out and more, like in my own world, I focus on the news that is relevant to the work that I do in my world. That's what I focus on. It's very limited. It's very specific. I'm not getting caught up in everything else. When something really big happens, I'll know about it because everyone will tell me about it, basically. I'll get to hear about it. And if it's particularly concerning, I'll look it up very quickly, and then I'm going to shut out of that within minutes and move on. And so I would say that, certainly when you're surrounding yourself with people or media or anything at all that is really intense or really negative or has a really specific intensity emotion to it, then yeah, that can absolutely have a ripple effect on someone's well-being and health and mood and emotions at that point in time, and potentially long-term if they keep doing it over and over and over again. And for me, for example, I focus a lot because it is really hard. 2020 was really hard. I'm a human being. I've had my own plenty of life challenges. Trust me. Like, I'm not over here living some, perfect little life, not by a long shot. And so, specifically 2020 kind of blew my mind, especially around April, May. I was like, wow, this is a lot. And so I've had to come up with my own new coping mechanisms. And, for me, what works for me is I'm very goal oriented. And so I really focus on the goals that I have set for myself and trying to really focus in on that, and only focus on including things in my life that will help me stay focused and stay motivated and achieve those goals and stay in as healthy and a positive mental space as possible, which is challenging given the world that we are all living in, which seems to be getting a lot heavier and more difficult to manage and deal with, even if you don't want to be a part of that negativity.
What would you give advice to people listening who regular kind of anger, how to help themselves be in that space and get out of that space? And also, how would you advise people, just everyday people, to deal with their loved ones when they are being angry? Because I think that there is certainly a way to approach people that you don't accelerate the situation. How would you advise people, just everyday people?
Yep. So I wouldn't be willing to provide any specific medical advice of any kind in this podcast. I'm going to do my disclaimer right now. This does not establish a clinical relationship with anyone. And I encourage anyone that has a pressing mental health concern to look for a licensed behavioral health clinician in their area to address their unique situation. So what I've said in this podcast is not any type of advice whatsoever. It's just a conversation I'm having with a podcaster. That is it. Okay. So, and if there's an emergency, call 911, go to your local emergency center. This is not for that at all. Now, as far as generally speaking, I think I did a podcast a long time ago called 4 Anger Management Tips. And I basically dealt with a lot of the, I'll say it, dumb things that people do, and say around people that are irritated and in a bad mood and angry. Okay. Billing issues, for example. I mean, that will really piss someone off, having to deal with some billing issues, people being told they owe money they don't owe, or having been billed incorrectly and stuff like that. And, condescension is definitely a way to get people, flared up. Anyone, I would imagine, so don't be condescending to people. Don't talk down to them like, you're better than them, or, and a lot of people may not even be aware that they're doing it, but it happens a lot. Billing situations is one that comes to my mind right away. Also, the one that makes me laugh in particular is telling someone that's angry and getting worked up, calm down. You need to calm down. Calm down right now. I think that will really have that opposite effect on people. I've seen this a lot. And when I see it on like TV, when people are in these different situations, like real life situations, and they're busy yell at someone to calm down. It's just almost like the opposite of effect on these people, on anyone. It's just like, don't tell me to calm down. And so it's, have some empathy, have some compassion for other people. Imagine what it would be like in their shoes, if you possibly could, to be in the same situation. Have some compassion for people. Be kind to people. Give person some space. You may be dealing with someone that does have a mental health disorder. Maybe they have some issues with feeling closed in, feeling claustrophobic. Maybe they have some kind of anxiety thing going on and feel like things are kind of closing in on them. So, give person some space. Don't get up on them in their space. Potentially, making a bad situation worse. These are just some common things with, a general situation, not an emergency situation where you need to call the police, and evacuate. Just, generally working with other humans in a compassionate, empathetic kind of way, which is lacking. I'll tell you that much. It's really lacking, I feel like. Yeah. And, and especially people in positions of power, people in positions of power may not even think they're in a position of power. But, if you work at, a medical office, for example, and you are the biller or whatever, the way you talk to people matters. That is a position of power. Someone may feel very disempowered when you're barking at them and saying, they owe whatever money or, whatever the case may be. So those are just some of the things I would say. And, another thing, too, with when it comes to family members and relatives, a thing I see commonly that's not helpful, and I've already kind of tried to address in this podcast interview, is not going around telling your friends, your family, your spouse that they're crazy, or that they have the, I'm not even want to say all the labels that I hear constantly. There's a few key labels that people love to say about their family, their friends, their spouse, especially if they're in a high conflict divorce, custody battle type situation. This isn't helpful, and just further stigmatizes mental health for people that do have those issues. And most of the time when people are throwing around the, heavy mental health labels, it's not even accurate. They're just trying to shame the person, and that's really toxic and ugly, and obviously not going to be, it's counterproductive. It's not going to be helpful. If the person does have a mental health problem, telling them that they're crazy or giving them some, label and yelling at them isn't going to be helpful either. But you would be amazed. This is very common, very common. And it just builds in more of a sense of shame for anyone that's struggling with anything, even if it's just simple as emotion management and life stress.
And what if I said to you, what about me? Maybe I fly off the handle, or I can feel myself bubbling up. What would you, I know this, again, it's not actual medical advice, but just suggestive of on a, what's the word, in theory, what would you say to me?
Yeah. Hypothetical theory. Yeah, it's really helpful for people in general, even myself, to be aware of my own emotions and how I'm feeling. Am I getting irritated? Am I tired? And then trying to get deeper of like what's causing that, is it something I watched? Is it something I was exposed to? Is it an annoying coworker? Is it a meeting I had that I found particularly upsetting? Am I having a technological issue, which a lot of people are having these days, that is really getting me just, irritated? So just being aware of emotions that you're having, that person's having. I try to do the same thing to myself, be aware. I remember before COVID-19, what a time to live. I remember I used to do a lot of hot yoga, and I just loved it. And basically, for those that don't know what hot yoga is, it's like yoga, but it's hot, really, really hot. And
that's a great description.
It hopefully, in my experience, 99% of the time, okay, maybe 95% of the time, it's at studios that have proper ventilation systems, and it's a very expensive thing that they have to invest in. Anyways, but I just found it really helpful to become more aware and in tune with myself. And there was relaxation exercises that were done at the end, and a lot of different poses were very stress relieving. And I found that was something really helpful for me. I miss doing that quite a lot. It'd be fantastic, but I don't have access to that at all anymore. Even if I was in an area that had it, I can pretty much guarantee you that it would be shut down or not what it was. So anyways, but yeah, trying to find what helps a person become more aware of their emotions, basically, because that's like step one of, self-management, like becoming aware of what's going on and being able to manage that. And that can be really difficult for people, especially when the world is spinning really fast, especially if it's their world and they're working and they have family and they have full-time adult obligations. It can be hard to slow down enough to even know how you're feeling. And especially if you're tired. If you're not getting enough sleep or a rest, gosh, that can really affect a person's, mood.
And diet. I actually had I think I brought this up on another episode, but we had our refrigerator broke down and the repairman came, and I said, you must see a lot of interesting refrigerators and food and things. I said, do you learn a lot about people by what's in the refrigerator? And he said, yes, because the people who are more angry tend to have the worst diets. And I thought, well, that's interesting because the brain needs nutrition, right? And if it's not being hydrated and it's not being fed with healthy vitamin enriched foods, proteins and fats, it's going to operate at a subpar level, and that can cause emotional outburst.
Yeah. It comes from a nutritionist type perspective there. And, most of America, sadly, I have observed has a pretty, a diet that definitely has a lot of room for improvement, because, God, that's just a whole nother conversation.
That's a whole other conversation. Yeah, for sure.
It really is. I actually changed my diet over 10 years ago radically. I was always kind of leaning more towards more of a plant-based thing. I'm not saying that's right for everybody or anything like that, but that was just kind of my tendencies. I think it was because I was exposed to it as a kid a little bit. And then, I just read a lot of different books and things like that. When I was still in the Army, actually in my early 20s, and I just really changed my diet. And it's been pretty transformed ever since. And there's so many crazy diets out there, wild diets, like just fad diets. And it seems like, I'm just so sick of the diets, which most of them where they're like basically saying, there was actually someone making fun of it too, but it's so true. They're basically saying like, if you have this diet, you won't have any acne. You'll be really sexy. Everyone will want to be you. Everyone will want to be with you. You'll have a good career. You'll be, it's like they try to pitch these diets. They're going to solve everything known to mankind if you're on this one really specific diet. And a lot of these diets feel very, almost like religions, like very cult-like, Talk
a little bit about, I know that you have a book and you have actually a handful of seminars coming up that I saw, at least on YouTube. I saw that they would be accessible in the coming weeks. So let's talk about that a little bit.
Periodically, I release basically videos that are recorded. They're not live. And those, I just do those basically, the recorded ones on kind of topics that inspire me. I'm releasing 2 different ones. One's about to be recorded probably today or tomorrow about domestic violence. It's gonna be like my 3rd video I've released about that. And I focus a lot on like domestic violence stereotypes. What is domestic violence? Who does that happen to? What is a safety plan? And just things that like a lot of people don't know about. I realize when I listen to people talk. So stuff like that, whatever inspires me at the time. A lot of it has to do with mental health topics because of, my life experience and work experience and stuff. And then also the book, I have a couple on pre-order right now. One is called Anger Management. It's basically a workbook, is what it is. And it's what it's going to be. And it's going to be released in ebook and then eventually paperback as well, most likely. And then there's Burnout, Self-Care for Behavioral Health Clinicians. That is in its third edition. I've got to do some updates. So basically, like, they're pretty much done. You guys have to like edit them. The anger management one has to be reformatted, which takes so long, because it's some workbook too. It's like, and there's graphics in it and just like really frustrating.
Yeah.
But yeah, so those are things that are keeping me really busy these days. And a lot of people have the interest in the topic of anger management, and increasingly so. It really does amaze me.
Yeah, well, I'm not surprised by that. The passive aggressive one that's coming up for you, to tell people what it's really going to be on, aside from passive aggressiveness, maybe the focal point or...
Yeah. So passive aggressive behavior is the focal point, but it's going to be basically about, because I'm going to shorten it. Last time it was so long. Oh my gosh, it was like just over an hour. That one. This one's, I'm aiming for like 30 minutes. And so basically it's going to be about passive aggressive behavior at work, at home, like in personal relationships, and basically in potential underlying reasons for it and potential solutions for it. So it's gonna be pretty general. I have an in-law who I just, I wish I could have some video recordings of their behavior towards me through the years, because I tell you, I could have used it in this presentation like no other.
You can do the whole passive aggressive lecture in Post-it notes, because the Post-it notes is the symbol of passive aggressive.
No, in the video, if I could see a video of this, you'd just be amazed. Like I had, because like one underlying cause is that they are not assertive communicators. You know what I mean? And so instead of just communicating what they need, what they want, what they think, how they feel, this passive aggressiveness just kind of oozes out of them if they don't like a person. So I have an in-law that clearly doesn't like me. I mean, it's kind of obvious, And we had a Thanksgiving, for example. I mean, it's something I'll never forget for the rest of my life. And the person basically, I mean, I'm paraphrasing, but this is pretty close to what they said, called me a gold digger. And it was so funny because I was so amazed for a few different reasons. And this isn't the only thing that they said, because I was like, where's the gold at? You know what I mean? Like, what are you talking about? For real. I was like, does somebody have some money I'm not aware of? Like, where did it go?
You gotta dig for it. It's a treasure.
But yeah, that was like so passive aggressive, and I just disengaged. I got up and walked away, and it was at Thanksgiving. We're out at a restaurant. This is a public area, a very nice restaurant. And I was just like, I'm not going to turn into the Jerry Springer show. It's not going to happen. Like, this is not going to come.
If you can't be passive aggressive at Thanksgiving, when can you be?
It's so stereotypical too. That whole Thanksgiving was so like the stereotype. Could have been some kind of bad, like some commercial for something.
I think you nail it, though. Honestly, when my roommates moved in, we had that talk. It said that was like, let's forego all Post-it notes. And if there's something wrong with any of us, we just say, hey. But a lot of people have issues with using their voice and feeling, putting themselves out there. It's a weird thing, we all want to be liked. And so if we say to someone, hey, this isn't okay, it's this weird, our ego steps in and says, oh, you can't say that maybe, because what if then it turns back on you? So people resort to the notes or, hey, Steve, stop eating my yogurt, God damn it, or whatever.
Yeah. And then there's the work part, which I plan on spending some time on. Because, I mean, it can go in a lot of different directions. I mean, there's so many different things, resentment can cause in relationships for unresolved issues in workplaces. There's a lot of workplace harassment problems, let me tell you. And across America, I think it's just like an epidemic. And, if you have policies that are not being uniformly enforced, and you have people that are forced to be around each other, who hate each other, who need to keep coming in for a paycheck to pay their bills, all these things contribute to it. It's just like, not just like a silver bullet thing. There's a lot of different contributing potentially factors. And then there's potential solutions too, whether or not they're going to be achievable for everybody that's something to be seen.
Sure. Now, theoretically, since we've been talking about grown-ups, what about when kids have anger stuff? Is that a whole new approach?
Yeah. So when it comes to children, I actually avoid the topic of children altogether because I refuse to work with children. I work with adults 18 plus. I have worked with children in the past. I worked for other people, did it pretty limited. What I will say about kids, in my experience, when you have a person, whether it's an adult or a child in a family, I've just seen a lot of families where they scapegoat somebody for all their problems, whether it be a child or an adult, and be like, this kid or this, person is the reason for all the problems in this family. If you just fix that person, then all the other problems will go away. And that has never been the case. Like, most of the time, like there's always an extreme exception. Okay. Right. But most of the time, it's typically a family problem. You know what I mean? And a family problem that needs to be addressed. And whether or not the family is willing to do that is a different story altogether. Certainly, if you have people coming in saying, insisting with that attitude that it's a singular problem, then, the likelihood that there'll be a openness to address family issues is probably less likely.
Do you think the thing is being born angry?
I don't think so. I mean, there, of course, when you talk about health problems in general, are people born with, physical health problems? Absolutely. Are people born with certain cognitive health problems? Absolutely. Like, those are things that do exist. But it's almost like saying, are people born being excessively happy? You know what I mean? It's like, well, I don't really think so. Now, there are tendencies, and to be maybe more gregarious or maybe more introverted or whatever the case. And then those tendencies can be brought out even more so in certain environments or certain life stressors being presented at a person. You know what I mean? So it's very variable, but I wouldn't say, kind of reminds me of those horror movies. Those horror movies where like those kids are born, they look evil and they come out. It's like the spawn of Satan.
Yeah, you bet. The Omen.
I don't think so. I don't think in real life. No, I really wouldn't agree with that. But keep in mind, I'm not a pediatric expert at all. I do not work with children actively currently, and I don't plan to ever.
Vanessa, how might people find you? And if they have questions for you or maybe need help, how might they find you?
I have a couple of different websites. I'll give you my universal link for people to find me. But basically, for media stuff, vanessamedia.com is a place you can find me. And that's a website that has like podcasts and videos and basically all the media type stuff. And then my private practice website is carolinaaddictionanger.com. I'm licensed to work with people inside of North Carolina only. So a person has to be physically located in the state of North Carolina for that to even potentially be an option at all. And of course, like I said, there's screening that has to be done and stuff like that. But yeah, those are the two websites I have. And then I'm on social media, and you can find me on YouTube. Just type in Vanessa Lech.
And I'll put links to all that on heyhumanpodcast.com. If by chance somebody listening is somewhere else and reaches out to you and says, hey, I'm not in your state, but could you recommend someone that can help in my state? Do you have those references?
No, I don't. I don't want to do that at all because that could become a dangerous situation. So no. Okay. If you're having any kind of mental health concern whatsoever, make sure you find a licensed clinician in your area to assist you with your unique needs. Do not reach out to me if you're across state lines for something like that. Okay. Now, sometimes, I come across just people in just it depends in different situations where I may, be able, because I do know clinicians in other states, you know what I mean? But it's like I don't have the whole directory. Yeah. For every single possible situation to include inpatient. I'm not the yellow pages of the clinicians.
There are places on Google, I'll put links to places that do that so that if somebody does have something that they need, they'll be able to reference it through my website. So I'll make sure that that's on there. But it's a good question to ask because sometimes people do have that stuff and sometimes they don't.
But I know a number of clinicians across state lines, and there have been times where I've referred people over there, or they've referred people over here to me if they, if those kinds of opportunities present themselves. But that's the main thing. I mean, it's pretty easy to find licensed clinicians in your area, thanks to search engines and stuff like that. Not unless you're in an area like I'm currently visiting where it's like the middle of nowhere.
Right. I get that. Vanessa, thank you. This has been really interesting. Please let me know when your books or when the workbooks are coming out, because I'll add them to the links page after the fact,
May 4th, 2021 is when it's going to be released. It's on pre-order right now.
Oh, great. I'll put the pre-order. Okay, great.
Yeah, anybody can pre-order that in the meantime.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much for your time. This has been really interesting.
No worries. Thank you for your time. Appreciate it.
Yeah. Have a good day. Bye, everybody. Thanks for listening. Rate and review Hey Human on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening. Bye.